My name is Chloe Vance, I'm 29 years old, and I thought I understood betrayal. I was wrong. Betrayal doesn't announce itself with shouting. It arrives as a text message at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, while you're sitting on the floor of a smart home you built with your own money, holding a tablet that controls every light, every lock, every camera in a house that isn't legally yours to lose, because it was never legally theirs to take. The text came from my brother, Julian. Hey Chloe, so the guest list for the wedding is locked. Sienna's family wants it elites only. No hard feelings, you get it right. I read it twice. Then I set the tablet down on the granite counter of the kitchen island, the same island I'd paid $14,200 to import from a quarry outside Verona, and I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because 3 days earlier, I had wired $41,000 into an escrow account to cover the final landscaping invoice for that same house. The invitations had already gone out. My name wasn't on a single one. I run a boutique venture fund out of a converted loft on 2nd Avenue in Seattle. 29 years old, for employees, $38 million in assets under management, and a reputation in the Pacific Northwest crypto scene for being the person who got out of a leveraged XRP position 11 days before the March 2023 banking collapse and turned $210,000 into $2.1 million before most people finished their coffee. I don't post about it. I don't need to. My work speaks in numbers, and numbers don't lie the way people do. My brother Julian is 33. He has never held a job longer than 14 months. He has, however, held a lot of titles: founder, CEO, visionary, chief growth officer of 3 companies that never grew anything except his Instagram following. He drives a leased Range Rover he can't afford, wears a Rolex he financed through a company that specializes in loans for people banks won't touch, and somehow, every single year, convinces our father that this is the year everything finally clicks for him. Our father, Arthur Vance, is 71 years old, and has spent the last decade quietly rewriting history in his own head. In his version, I am the daughter who got lucky with computer money, and Julian is the son who is one deal away. Arthur doesn't care about facts. He cares about the Vance name looking a certain way at the country club on Mercer Island, and Julian has always been better at looking the part than actually being it. I have a flaw I don't like admitting on camera, so I'll admit it here instead. I stayed quiet for too long. I let Julian borrow $60,000 from me in 2021, and never once mentioned it to our father, because some small, humiliated part of me wanted Arthur to look at me the way he looks at Julian, like I mattered without having to prove it first. That silence cost me more than money. It taught my family that I could be erased from a room, and wouldn't say a word. That ends now. Here's the part of this story that Julian doesn't know I know. The house, the 6,400 square foot smart estate sitting on 2.1 acres of the old Vance family land off Lake Sammamish, the one with the $572,000 build cost, the automated lighting, the biometric locks, the wine cellar climate controlled to 55 degrees, that house exists because of a trade I made on November 3, 2021. I converted 340 ETH at $4,620 a coin into a stablecoin position 11 hours before the market corrected, then re-entered on the dip. The profit from that single 48-hour window funded the land clearing, the foundation, and half the smart home infrastructure. Julian didn't build that house. I did. He just decided to live in it, rent-free, while telling his fiancé's family a very different story. My mother, Diana Vance, died on February 14, 2023. Pancreatic cancer, 11 months from diagnosis to the end. 6 days before she passed, she asked the hospice nurse to leave the room, and she took my hand and told me something I didn't fully understand until much later. The men in this family will spend what isn't theirs if you let them, Chloe. Don't let them. Then she handed me a sealed envelope from her nightstand drawer, and made me promise not to open it until I needed it. I put it in my safe deposit box at a branch on Rainier Avenue, and didn't think about it again for almost a year. I want you to remember that envelope. It matters more than anything else in this story. Julian is marrying Sienna Sterling on August 22. Sienna's father, Marcus Sterling, no relation to my grandfather, a coincidence Julian has milked for a laugh at every dinner, is one of the largest commercial real estate developers on the West Coast, with a portfolio north of $900 million. Sienna grew up with a driver, a Rothko in the hallway, and an expectation that everyone around her performs at a certain altitude. She is not cruel. She is simply someone who has never once had to ask whether the story she's being told is true. And Julian has been telling her a story. I found out the details from my cousin Priya, who was at the engagement dinner in June at Canlis. According to Priya, Julian introduced our family to the Sterlings by saying our late mother had left the estate to be split evenly, that the smart home on Lake Sammamish was part of the Vance family trust Julian was managing, and this is the part that made my stomach turn, that I ran a small hospitality staffing company that occasionally helped with family events. Head of catering. That's the title Julian gave me on the internal wedding planning document Sienna's event coordinator sent to 12 vendors. I found out because one of those vendors, a florist named Rosalind who I'd worked with on a fundraiser 2 years earlier, called to ask if my team could handle the raw bar for 180 guests. I didn't yell at Julian. I didn't call my father. I sat in my office on 2nd Avenue with the city lights coming on outside the window, and I opened my laptop, and I pulled every document connected to that house, the deed, the LLC formation papers, the construction loan, the crypto trust that funded it, the utility accounts, the smart home service contract, all of it registered under Vance Land Holdings LLC, a company I formed alone in April 2022, with myself as the sole managing member. Julian's name appears nowhere on a single document tied to that property. He doesn't know that. He has spent 2 years telling everyone, our father, Sienna's family, his own reflection, that the house is his inheritance, his trust, his future. He has been planning to use it as collateral. I found the pre-approval letter myself, forwarded to me by accident when Julian's mortgage broker, a man named Curtis Fenwick at a private lending firm downtown, sent an email meant for Julian's assistant to an old shared drive Julian, and I still had linked from 2019. The letter, dated July 9, 2026, approved a $500,000 home equity line against borrower's primary residence, using an appraisal that listed Julian Marcus Vance as the sole title holder. He was trying to mortgage a house he doesn't own, using signatures on documents he never had the right to sign. 3 weeks before his wedding, I called my attorney, Leo Vance, no relation, just a shared last name, and 11 years of friendship since law school at UW, and I read him the loan documents over the phone. He went quiet for a long moment. "Chloe," he said, "this isn't a family disagreement anymore. This is fraud. Forged signature fraud, on a federal loan application, tied to a property you legally own. You know that, right?" I did know that. I also knew something Leo didn't yet, that in 9 days, on August 15th, exactly 1 week before the wedding, I was scheduled to close a private sale on that exact property to a buyer who had been asking about the Lake Sammamish parcel for over a year. A buyer with cash. A buyer who wanted immediate occupancy. I hadn't told anyone about that conversation. Not my father. Not Julian. Not even Leo, until that call. I sat back in my chair and looked at the wedding invitation sitting on my desk. The one I wasn't invited to, delivered anyway by a cousin who assumed I already had one. Cream cardstock, gold foil, a photograph of Julian and Sienna laughing on a dock, the words "An Elite Celebration" printed across the top in a font that cost someone $4 a letter. Underneath the invitation was the sealed envelope from my mother. I still hadn't opened it. I picked it up that night for the first time in almost 3 years, turned it over in my hands, and felt the outline of something solid inside, not just paper. Something with weight, something with edges, something that felt less like a letter and more like a decision my mother had made for me before she ever knew how badly I would need it. I didn't open it that night. I wanted to know exactly how bad it would get first, because I was starting to understand something about my family that I hadn't let myself believe until that exact moment. They weren't just planning to humiliate me at a wedding. They were planning to steal a $572,000 house out from under me, using my own dead mother's name to do it, and they had absolutely no idea that the woman they'd labeled the caterer was the only person on earth holding the deed, the trust, the buyer's contract, and now, an envelope that was about to tell me exactly how far my mother had gone to make sure this day never worked out the way Julian thought it would. I finally broke the seal. What was inside changed everything I thought I knew about who really built this family's fortune, and who my mother had trusted, all along, to burn it all down. Inside the envelope was a flash drive, a single sheet of notarized paper, and a photograph of a piece of land I didn't recognize. I read the paper first. It was dated January 30, 2023, 15 days before my mother died, and notarized by a woman named Grace Halloway at a small office in Issaquah I'd never heard of. It was titled Statement of Intent and Disclosure, and it was written in my mother's handwriting, scanned and printed, with her signature at the bottom next to Grace's seal. To my daughter Chloe. If you are reading this, it means you needed to know the truth about your grandfather's land before your brother or your father found a way to spend what was never theirs to spend. I am sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was afraid of what your father would do if he knew I'd kept this from him for 11 years. I sat on my kitchen floor at 1:14 a.m. reading that sentence 4 times, before I understood what she meant by kept this from him. The photograph was of a parcel of land in Chelan County, roughly 90 minutes from where I grew up. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, Marcus's real gift. Not the lake house. This? My grandfather, Marcus Vance, died in 2011 when I was 14. Everyone in the family always believed the Lake Sammamish property was his only significant asset, willed jointly to my father, and eventually, meant to pass down to Julian as the family legacy, a story Julian had repeated so many times over the years that I'd never once questioned it. But according to the flash drive, which I plugged into my laptop with shaking hands, my grandfather had quietly purchased 40 acres in Chelan County in 1998 for $190,000, using a private holding company called Cascade Ridge Partners. He never told my father. He told my mother instead, his daughter-in-law, not his son, because according to a letter also saved on that drive, dated 3 months before his death, he didn't trust Arthur to hold on to anything without giving half of it away to make himself look generous. That land, appraised in a document dated April 2025, was worth $3.4 million. Not because of the land itself, but because of what sat 60 feet beneath a section of it, a mineral and water rights easement that a regional utility company had been quietly trying to purchase for 2 years, offering escalating bids that had climbed from $1.1 million to $3.4 million as of the most recent letter in the file. My mother had been the sole trustee of Cascade Ridge Partners since 2012. She never told my father. She never told Julian. She told me, in an envelope I wasn't supposed to open until I needed it, and buried in the folder on that flash drive was one more document that made my hands go cold. A trust amendment, dated 1 month before her death, naming me as successor trustee, effective immediately upon her passing. I had owned 40 acres of appraised mineral-rich land in Chelan County for 3 years, and had no idea. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment because it wasn't triumph. It was grief, sharp and unexpected, for a mother who had spent the last months of her life quietly building me a floor to stand on because she didn't trust the men in her own family to leave one under me. And underneath the grief was something colder, an understanding of exactly how long this had been planned on both sides. My mother had been protecting me since 2023. Julian had been lying to Sienna's family since at least the engagement dinner in June. 2 very different clocks had been running, and mine, it turned out, had a 9-year head start. I didn't sleep that night. At 6:40 a.m. I called Leo. I need you to see something before you say anything else about the mortgage fraud. I told him. 2 hours later, sitting across from him in his office on 4th Avenue, I watched him read the Cascade Ridge documents twice, the second time slower than the first. This changes the leverage completely, he said. If this holds up, and based on the notarization and the trustee amendment, it should. You're not just the sole owner of a $572,000 smart home your brother has been lying about. You're the sole trustee of a $3.4 million asset your entire family doesn't know exists. Chloe, does your father know any of this? He didn't. That was the point. I made a decision sitting in that office that I still think about. I could have used the Chelan County land quietly, sold it, moved on, and let Julian's wedding happen without ever telling my family what I now controlled. Part of me wanted that, the version of this where I simply disappear from their lives with what's mine and never look back. But my mother hadn't written that letter so I could disappear. She'd written it so I'd stop being erased. Isolation had already started by then, though I didn't fully register it as a pattern until later. My father stopped returning my calls the week after Julian's "no hard feelings" text, which I now understood wasn't an oversight, it was a strategy. 3 separate cousins mentioned, almost in passing, that Arthur had told them I was going through something, and wasn't quite herself lately, language that, once I heard it repeated by 3 different people using nearly identical phrasing, I recognized as coordinated. My father wasn't just letting me be cut out of the wedding. He was quietly building a narrative to explain my absence before anyone had reason to ask why I wasn't there. I found out how far that narrative had gone from Priya again, 3 days later. Sienna's mother, Renata Sterling, had apparently asked Arthur directly why the caterer shared a last name with the groom. According to Priya, my father laughed it off and said, "Distant cousin, we just kept her on for the family discount." Distant cousin. My own father told a room full of strangers I was a distant cousin, to protect a lie my brother built to look wealthier than he is. That was the moment the last piece of hesitation in me disappeared. I spent the next 4 days doing 3 things simultaneously. First, I had Leo draft a formal cease and desist to Julian's mortgage broker, Curtis Fenwick, informing him in writing that the appraisal and loan application for the Lake Sammamish property contained a forged signature and fraudulent ownership claim, and that any disbursement of funds would result in immediate legal action against both the borrower and the lending firm. Fenwick's assistant called Leo's office within 90 minutes, visibly rattled, confirming the loan had not yet closed and would be frozen pending review. Second, I reached out, carefully, quietly, to a contact I'd made 2 years earlier at a blockchain investment summit in San Francisco. His name is Desmond Okafor, a Seattle-based crypto fund manager with a portfolio that had grown past $600 million, who had mentioned more than once, half-joking, that he wanted something with land and water rights near the mountains, somewhere with real infrastructure potential, not just a view. I hadn't taken it seriously at the time. I took it seriously now. I didn't mention the Lake Sammamish house to Desmond yet. I wanted to see what he'd offer for the Chelan County parcel first, purely as a test of how fast serious money moves when it wants something. His office called back in 6 hours. His opening offer for the 40 acres, contingent on a fast closing, was $3.1 million cash, no financing contingencies, closing within 3 weeks if the trustee paperwork was clean. Mine was clean. It had been clean since the moment my mother signed it. Third, and this is the part one hadn't told Leo yet, the part I'd been sitting with alone for 2 nights, I started thinking seriously about the Lake Sammamish house differently. Not as something to protect. As something to release, at the exact moment it would cost my family the most to lose it. I want to explain something about myself here, because I think it matters. I am not a person who enjoys conflict. I've spent my entire career avoiding it, structuring deals so quietly that most of Seattle's finance scene doesn't recognize my name outside a small circle of people who actually read the filings. My instinct, even now, was to handle this cleanly, privately, without spectacle. Leo pushed back on that hard. "Chloe, you tried quiet for 2 years. Quiet got you labeled the caterer at your own brother's wedding. Quiet got your father telling people you're a distant cousin having a breakdown. You are allowed to stop protecting people who are actively trying to erase you." He wasn't wrong. But I still hesitated, because some part of me, the 14-year-old who watched my grandfather's casket lowered into the ground without knowing what he'd actually left behind, the 26-year-old who quietly covered my brother's $60,000 mistake instead of telling my father the truth, still wanted, more than anything, for this family to simply see me. Not through a courtroom. Not through a headline. Just see me. That version of me got her answer 9 days later. I was in my office on a Thursday afternoon, finalizing the Cascade Ridge sale documents with Leo on a video call, when my phone buzzed with a calendar invite I hadn't sent. Someone had added me to a group text thread, Julian's wedding planning committee, 12 numbers deep, clearly added by mistake by an assistant who didn't check the contact list closely enough. I almost left the thread immediately. Then I saw the pinned message at the top. It was a seating chart. Round tables, numbered 1 through 18, arranged across a rendering of the Lake Sammamish property's back lawn, my back lawn, the one attached to a house I owned outright, with a small red pin marking a folding table near the kitchen entrance, tucked behind the catering tent, labeled in a font size noticeably smaller than the rest. Staff table, vendor coordinators. My name was written next to it. Chloe Vance. Not cousin. Not caterer. My actual, full legal name, assigned a folding chair behind a tent, on land I owned, in a house I built, at a wedding celebrating a lie my family had spent months constructing to impress people who had no idea the ground under their reception tent belonged, entirely and legally, to the woman they'd seated by the kitchen door. I didn't respond to the thread. I closed my laptop, walked to the window of my office, and looked out over 2nd Avenue as the evening traffic built up below. Then I picked up my phone and called Desmond Okafor back, not about the Chelan County land this time. I have another property, I told him. Lake Sammamish. Smart home, 6,400 square feet, 2.1 acres, fully automated, deed clean, no liens. I need you to understand something before you answer. I'm not looking for the best offer. I'm looking for the fastest one, and I need the buyer comfortable taking possession on a very specific date, one I'll give you in the next 48 hours, once I confirm it with my attorney. There was a pause on the line, then Desmond laughed, low and slow, the way people laugh when they suddenly understand they're not being offered a real estate deal. They're being handed a plan. Chloe, he said, what date are we talking about? I looked down at the wedding invitation still sitting on my desk, the one with the gold foil and the photograph of Julian and Sienna laughing on a dock that wasn't even theirs to stand on. August 22nd, I said. The house needs new owners before the cake is cut. Desmond's team moved faster than I expected and slower than I needed. His attorney, a sharp, unbothered woman named Patrice Okonkwo, called me the following Monday morning with a term sheet already drafted. Full cash offer on the Lake Sammamish property, $612,000, $40,000 over my mother's original cost basis, contingent on one condition Desmond had added himself. He wants immediate occupancy rights written into the closing, Patrice said. Not 30 days. Not 14. The day the deed transfers, his team wants to walk the property that same evening. He said you'd understand why. I did. I told her the closing date needed to be August 22nd, and she went quiet for exactly 2 seconds before asking, in the driest voice I'd heard from anyone that entire month, whether there was context she should know about scheduling a residential closing on the same day as what appeared to be a wedding reception on the same property. I gave her the short version. She didn't laugh. She said, we'll have a mobile notary and county recording confirmation ready by 4 p.m. that day. My client has handled faster. Then she asked me to send over the smart home system credentials as part of the transfer package, for continuity of automated systems, which is a phrase I'd underlined twice on the document Leo sent over an hour later, because I already knew exactly what I planned to do with those credentials before the buyer ever touched them. Leo and I met that Wednesday at his office to finalize the closing package. He'd spent the previous 3 days quietly working 2 other threads I hadn't asked him to open, and when he laid them out on the conference table, I understood why he looked like he hadn't slept. The first was Curtis Fenwick, the mortgage broker. After receiving the cease and desist, Fenwick's firm had conducted an internal review and discovered something Leo hadn't anticipated. This wasn't Julian's first attempt at using forged documentation to secure financing against property he didn't own. In 2020, Julian had applied for a $180,000 business loan using a notarized letter claiming partial ownership of our grandfather's original Lake Sammamish land, 6 years before I'd even formed Vance Land Holdings. That application had been denied at the time for insufficient documentation, but the file still existed, buried in Fenwick's firm's archive, and it now sat in a folder on Leo's desk with a sticky note that said, in his handwriting, pattern of conduct. The second thread was Priya again, though this time it wasn't gossip, it was a formal statement. Priya had worked, briefly, as an unpaid coordinator for the wedding after Sienna's original planner quit 6 weeks before the event, citing communication issues with the groom's family. Priya told Leo, on the record, that she'd overheard Julian on the phone in early July telling someone, she believed it was Curtis Fenwick, based on the names used, that he needed the loan funds before the honeymoon because he'd already put down a deposit on a boat he hadn't told Sienna about, using money he didn't have, expecting the mortgage to cover the difference. I sat with that for a long moment. My brother wasn't just trying to steal a house out from under me to look successful at his wedding. He was trying to steal it to fund a lie he was already telling his new wife, days into a marriage that hadn't started yet. This is enough for a fraud referral on its own, Leo said. You don't need the wedding day theatrics, Chloe. We could end this quietly, right now, with a filing. I thought about that seriously. I want to be honest about how seriously, because I think people watching this assume revenge is always the loud choice and restraint is always the noble one, and it isn't that simple. Quiet had already failed once. Quiet was the folding chair behind the catering tent with my name on it in a smaller font. I wasn't choosing spectacle because I wanted an audience. I was choosing it because my family had spent 2 years building an entire performance out of my erasure, in front of people who had no idea the ground they were standing on belonged to me, and I had decided that the only ending that would actually land, the only one that would stop this pattern instead of just pausing it, was one where the truth arrived in the same room as the lie, at the same volume, in front of the same witnesses. That Thursday, I drove out to the Lake Sammamish property for what I told myself was a final walkthrough before closing. I hadn't been back since the staff table seating chart appeared in that group text. The wedding tent was already up, white canvas stretched across the back lawn, where I'd once stood with the landscaping crew in April 2022, marking out irrigation lines with little orange flags. String lights were being hung between the property's automated exterior fixtures I'd had installed, calibrated to a system I'd programmed myself, connected to an app on my phone that Julian had never once asked me how to access, because in his mind, he already owned all of it. I let myself into the house using my code. Nothing had changed on the inside except a few boxes near the entryway, wedding favors, a rack of garment bags I assumed belonged to Sienna's bridal party, staged as if the house were already a stage set for someone else's story. I walked through to the media room and opened the smart home control panel on the wall, the one that operated every screen in the house, every exterior light, every door lock, and this was the detail Desmond's attorney had unknowingly handed me, every guest-facing display, including the 6 65-inch screens mounted throughout the first floor that Julian had insisted on installing 8 months earlier so guests could watch a highlight reel of the Vance family legacy during the reception. I stood there for a long time, looking at that panel, thinking about my mother's handwriting on that notarized statement, about the way she'd built me a floor to stand on without ever telling me she was doing it, and about the 14-year-old version of me who used to sit on this exact piece of land before the house existed, back when it was just cleared dirt and my grandfather's flags marking where he thought the well should go. I made a decision standing in that media room that I hadn't fully committed to until that exact second. I wasn't going to have Desmond's team walk in quietly after the reception ended. I was going to let the closing complete precisely at 6:45 p.m., during cocktail hour, before dinner service, while every guest Sienna's family had flown in from 3 states was still standing on that lawn with a drink in hand, and I was going to use my own system, the one I'd built, the one nobody in my family had ever bothered to ask me about, to make sure the truth reached every screen in that house at the exact moment the deed changed hands. I called Leo that night and told him the plan in full. He was quiet for a long time before he responded. You understand this becomes a story people tell for years, right? Not just online. In your actual life. Your father, Sienna's family, everyone at that wedding, this is the version of events they'll remember forever. I know, I said. And you're still doing it this way. My mother spent the last 6 weeks of her life notarizing documents in a lawyer's office in Issaquah, so her son wouldn't inherit something he never earned, and her daughter wouldn't lose something she built with her own hands. She didn't do that quietly because she wanted a quiet ending, Leo. She did it because she ran out of time to do it any other way. I'm not running out of time. I have exactly enough of it to do this the way it actually needs to be done. He didn't argue after that. Instead, he spent the next 6 days building the legal architecture to make sure everything that happened on August 22nd would hold up completely, not as spectacle but as fact. Every document. Every disclosure. Every signature Julian had forged, cross-referenced and authenticated by a forensic document examiner Leo brought in, a quiet, precise man named Harold Bion who confirmed, in a report dated August 18, that the signature on Julian's mortgage application did not match verified exemplars of Chloe M. Vance's signature in stroke pressure, letter formation, or pen lift pattern, with a confidence level exceeding standard forensic threshold. That report went into a folder. That folder went into a leather portfolio. And for days before the wedding, I sat across from Desmond Okafor himself for the first time in person, at a coffee shop near Pike Place, and slid the portfolio across the table along with the closing documents for both properties, Chelan County, finalized and wired 3 days earlier, and Lake Sammamish, ready to close on command. I need one more thing from your team, I told him. Not for the closing. For after it. Desmond raised an eyebrow, unbothered, the way people are unbothered when they've already decided a deal is worth whatever comes next. I need your security team to be on that property by 6:30 p.m. on the 22nd, dressed like they belong there, with the vacate notice ready to hand my brother the second the transfer confirms. And I need you to understand that when they hand him that notice, there are going to be roughly 180 people watching. Desmond smiled, slow and easy, and reached for his coffee. Chloe, he said, I didn't buy a house from you. I bought a story I get to tell at every dinner party for the rest of my life. My team will be there at 6. I left that coffee shop with 4 days left before the wedding, a signed and notarized closing agreement in my bag, a forensic fraud report sitting in Leo's office ready to file the moment the ceremony ended, and a version of myself I didn't fully recognize yet, someone who had spent 29 years being quiet so her family could feel comfortable, and who was now, for the first time, choosing to be exactly as loud as the truth actually was. What I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't find out until the morning of the wedding itself, standing in my kitchen at 8 a.m. reading a text from a name I hadn't heard from in over a year, was that Julian wasn't the only person in the family keeping a secret from Sienna's side of the aisle. And the one I was about to uncover would change exactly how I chose to walk into that reception. The text came in at 8:03 a.m. on the morning of the wedding, from a number I hadn't saved. This is Sienna. I think we need to talk before today happens. I found something in Julian's home office last night, and I don't think it means what he told me it means. I stared at that message for almost a full minute before I understood what it meant. Sienna Sterling, the woman I'd never spoken to directly in 9 months of engagement announcements and vendor threads, the woman my brother had built an entire fictional version of me for, had reached out to the person she believed was the caterer, hours before her own wedding, because something in her fiancé's paperwork had stopped making sense to her. I called her instead of texting back. She picked up on the second ring, her voice low, like she was standing somewhere she didn't want to be overheard. I found a folder in Julian's desk 2 nights ago, she said. Loan documents. A signature that's supposed to be yours on paperwork about this house. I looked you up properly for the first time last week, Chloe. Not the version Julian gave my parents. The actual public filings. Vance Land Holdings. Your fund. I don't understand why he told my family you cater events. I told her the truth. All of it as fast and clearly as I could, standing in my kitchen with coffee going cold on the counter, the deed, the trust, the forged signature, the mortgage fraud referral sitting ready in Leo's office, the Chelan County land my mother had quietly protected for 3 years so it would never end up funding someone else's image of success. Sienna didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. My family has spent $400,000 on a wedding for a man who doesn't own the house we're standing in tonight, she said finally, flat, almost calm in the way people get right before they aren't calm at all. And he let my mother ask you, to your face, why you shared his last name, and he called you a distant cousin getting the family discount. He did. Okay, she said. Then I need you to tell me exactly what's going to happen today, because I am not walking down an aisle without knowing. I told her. All of it, the closing at 6:45 p.m., the screens, Desmond's team, the vacate notice. I gave her the choice to stop it, to call off the wedding quietly beforehand, and spare herself the version of this that would end up as a story people told for years. She was quiet again, longer this time. No, she said. Let it happen exactly the way you planned it. I want to be standing right next to him when it does. The ceremony went forward at 4 p.m. under a white arbor near the water, Julian in a tuxedo that cost more than most people's monthly rent, Sienna in a dress that had been featured in a regional bridal magazine, our father Arthur seated in the front row wearing the particular expression he reserves for moments he believes reflect well on him. I wasn't there for the ceremony. I watched the timeline from Leo's car, parked half a mile down the private road, waiting. At 5:50 p.m., the reception moved to the back lawn, my back lawn, the one I'd marked with orange irrigation flags for years earlier, now covered in white folding chairs, and a dance floor assembled directly over the grass I'd chosen myself. Cocktail hour began at 6 o'clock. String lights came on across fixtures I'd programmed from an app on my phone. A photographer moved through the crowd. Somewhere near the kitchen entrance, I later learned, there was, in fact, a small folding table with my name on it, empty, because the caterer my family invented never existed to sit there. At 6:44 p.m., I got a text from Patrice Okonkwo, wire confirmed. County recording accepted. Deed transfers in 60 seconds. At 6:45 p.m., every screen in the Lake Sammamish house went dark for 4 seconds, then came back on, not with the highlight reel Julian had installed 8 months earlier, but with a single scan document, held on screen at full resolution, magnified so the text filled the frame, the forensic report from Harold Byun, stamped and dated, stating in plain, certified language that the signature on a $500,000 loan application did not belong to Chloe M. Vance. Guests near the windows noticed first. Conversations stopped in small clusters, then spread. By the time the second document appeared, Julian's 2020 loan application using our grandfather's land, denied, archived, now public on 6 screens simultaneously, most of the reception had turned toward the house. I walked onto that lawn at 6:47 p.m., in a plain navy dress, no bridal party colors, nothing designed to compete with anything, because I wasn't there to be seen as part of the wedding. I was there as the owner of the property everyone was standing on. Desmond's security team, 3 men in dark suits who looked exactly like guests until they didn't, moved toward the house entrance at the same moment I crossed the lawn. Julian saw me before our father did. I watched his face move through 4 expressions in under 2 seconds, confusion, recognition, calculation, and then something close to panic, the specific panic of a man watching a story he built over 2 years collapse in front of the one audience he'd built it for. Chloe, what is this? He said, loud enough that people nearby turned. This is a closing, I said. This house sold today, Julian. 6:45 p.m. It has a new owner now, and he'd like you to have this. One of Desmond's men stepped forward and handed Julian a folded notice. I didn't need to read it aloud. The words "Notice of Immediate Vacate" are large enough on that particular form that half the wedding party could read them from 6 feet away. Marcus Sterling, Sienna's father, walked over from the bar with the specific stillness of a man who has spent 30 years in commercial real estate and understands exactly what a vacate notice means before anyone explains it to him. He looked at the notice, then at Julian, then at me. You're Chloe, he said. Not a question. I am. You own this property. I do. I built it. My mother's trust funded it. My brother has spent the last several months telling your family a different version of that story, and this morning, telling your daughter the same thing, until she found the paperwork herself 2 nights ago. Marcus turned to Sienna. She didn't look shocked because she wasn't, she'd known since 8 a.m., had walked down that aisle at 4 p.m. already carrying the truth, deciding, on her own terms, exactly how and when to let it land. She looked at Julian for a long moment, longer than anyone standing there was comfortable with. You told my mother she was a distant cousin, Sienna said. You told my father this house was a family trust you managed. You tried to mortgage a property you don't own to pay for a boat you already put a deposit on without telling me. I found the marina paperwork in the same folder, Julian. I know about the boat too. The slap happened fast, open-handed, sharp enough that the string quartet near the dance floor actually stopped mid-phrase. Sienna didn't say anything else. She turned, gathered the hem of her dress in one hand, and walked toward her father's car, and Marcus Sterling followed her without a single glance back at the man his daughter had almost married. Arthur reached me a few seconds later, his face gray in a way I'd never seen on him before, not even at my mother's funeral. "What have you done?" he said, and it wasn't really a question either. It was an accusation dressed as one. "I sold my house, Dad. On the deed. The one with my name on it. The one that's been mine since 2022, funded by a crypto trade you never knew I made, sitting on land Grandpa quietly gave Mom to protect from exactly this. I didn't do anything to Julian that Julian didn't already do to himself. I just made sure the people he lied to found out at the same time as everyone else." He didn't have an answer for that. I don't think he'd ever had to build one before, because for 29 years, I had always been the daughter who absorbed things quietly so he wouldn't have to. I stayed for another 20 minutes, long enough to watch Desmond's team begin the walkthrough with the property manager, long enough to see Julian standing alone near the bar with the vacate notice still in his hand, long enough to understand that nothing I did that evening had been about cruelty. It had been about refusing, for the first time in my life, to let my own erasure be the price of my family's comfort. 3 weeks later, the Chelan County utility easement closed for $3.4 million on schedule, with no complications, because my mother had built that paperwork clean enough that nothing about it could ever be contested. Julian moved into a 2-bedroom rental in Bellevue that October, working, as of the last time Priya mentioned it, at a boat dealership on the east side. The mortgage fraud referral Leo filed resulted in a formal investigation. I don't discuss the outcome publicly, and I won't here, except to say that Curtis Fenwick's firm no longer processes residential loans in King County. My father and I speak twice a year now, briefly, mostly logistics, mostly nothing. I used to think I wanted more than that from him. I've stopped waiting for it. I used part of the Lake Sammamish proceeds, combined with the Cascade Ridge closing, to fund something I'd been quietly researching for over a year before any of this happened, a small sustainable development project on a private island parcel off the San Juan archipelago, something entirely mine, built the way I actually wanted to build something, without a single person in my family knowing the first thing about it until it was already finished. Sienna and I still talk occasionally. Not often. But she sent me a message last spring, one line, no explanation needed. "Thank you for telling me the truth before I said yes to a lie for the rest of my life." I never went back to the Lake Sammamish house after that night. Desmond sends me a photo of the lake view every few months, unprompted, a small joke between us now. I don't need to see it in person. I know exactly what it looks like. I built it. They banned me from the wedding because they thought a folding chair behind a catering tent was the only seat I'd ever be given in that family. They were wrong about the chair. They were wrong about the house. And by the time anyone at that reception understood what they'd actually lost, I was already 3 weeks out from closing on a piece of land my mother protected for a decade, one they never even knew existed.